Welcome everyone to our next video titled Why Gun Control. As I grew up in the Midwest, I think I'm very fortunate for the fact that I had family members and relatives that loved to be in the outdoors and hunt, and I was in target shooting. I was privileged to have someone there teaching me how to properly do that and what to do. And it's been a great experience, and I love it. And it's made me appreciate that Second Amendment right that our forefathers gave us. You know, as we look at the violence that we had in the Newtown, Connecticut shooting a couple of years ago, in the massive amounts of shootings that we've seen in malls and in schools and in college campuses lately, it makes you want to cry on what society has become and what it has done. We look at the one side of that faction that says, this is not good. We need to come back in. We need to put in legislation that everybody is going to register their guns. We're going to do a background check from everybody, and we can stop this from happening. You have the other segment of the gun rights people who say, you know, what we really need to do is we just need to put armed officers and armed sentinels in our school, and we'll take care of the problem. Well, I believe that both of those factions are correct from the standpoint that we need to do something. But before we can fix something, we have to know the cause. And most of the stuff that, again, we're doing today is fixed by legislation or throwing money at and hoping it goes away and I can put it in the back burner for a while. As we try to look for that cause, I'm going to stem back to something we just talked about very shortly ago. I believe it started in the 1940s with Dr. Spock's book and how we began to raise our children with a lack of respect for others. If you think about it, as I stated before, if all of a sudden you generate this society that has no respect for anybody, you become chaos. I'm going to do what I want to. I see no consequences. I'm not going to worry about it. But I believe it expanded in the 1970s when many parts of the country began to ban corporal punishment from our school and our society. Now, no matter what your view is on corporal punishment, I'm not condoning it or promoting it or saying it's bad. I'm saying when it was there, the children had a consequence for what they did. Because of that consequence, they respected the people because they didn't want that consequence anymore. In those days, the parents had respect for the teacher and the authorities. They did not come back as they do so many times today and saying, my little Johnny cannot do anything wrong. Don't tell me he can. I'm going to defend him to the nth degree, whether he's right or wrong, with no respect for that institution to help control those children. We have to get back to where the parents has to know their child well enough. And if someone says you did it wrong, let's investigate it, not to stand up for the child and badmouth the teacher in the school system all the time at home, because that just breeds more disrespect, and pretty soon it's all lost. But it all comes down to the point of when we started to do that, and when we lost that consequence, we did increase gang violence in this country and violence in general. Again, do I believe we need armed sentinels and guns and things of that nature and legislation to do it? No. I think we have to do it ourselves. That word respect is something that we learn in those developmental years. It grows. As we learn what it is, we learn to respect others. We can never earn respect until we learn to give it. And that, I think, is what we're lacking. The people that are doing this, yes, there's some of those that have some mental incapacities. I understand that. But so much of the time in this youth era, I think it's nothing more than, I don't fit in, nobody ever told me no, I don't know how to adjust, this is how I'm going to retaliate. I think we need to remember that guns don't kill people. People kill people. You might be amazed if you go out there and look at some of the other means how people get murdered. guns is at the bottom of the list. But yet, we want to get rid of it. I'm guessing there's a reason. We must remember that when our forefathers set up this Second Amendment to that Constitution, they did not say that gun ownership is your privilege, or that you should be able to have guns so you can go out and do sport shooting or you can hunt. No, they said gun ownership is your inherent right, period. No questions asked, nothing put on the side of it. Now, before I talked a little bit about that word gradualism, how we work into things, I'm going to do a comparison of 1938 Austria and the U.S. in recent years. To set that stage, I want you to remember that economic conditions are different here than they were then. But at that point in time, Austria is a very religious Christian and mostly Catholic country that had fallen in very bad economic times. They looked across the border at Germany and saw how people were employed, how good things they were, and everything was great the way they saw. They didn't see the Gestapo and all the other bad things that were happening. But unemployment and inflation were on the top side of 30%. The economics were in a disarray. There was huge violence between the various political systems. Most of it was Nazi and communism. And I'm talking about violence in the streets. The people were tired of it. They wanted something different. They looked at having an election and really coming in and voting for Hitler to come in and run the country so we could change it. But Mr. Hitler was really afraid of how that election may turn out. So on March 12, 1938, he rolled into Austria with his guns and tanks, totally unopposed, many people cheering for him. And on April 10th, they came back with a plebiscite, which is nothing more than an election or a referendum, and 97% of the people voted to have Hitler run their country. Okay? And they're jumping in the streets in joy. Things are going to change. We're going to have things again that we've been deprived of, and things are going to be just fine. You get low enough, you'll do anything. You get complacent enough, you'll do anything. I'm going to come back in a comparison slide. So one of the first things that Mr. Hitler did, this being a very religious country, and think of the fact of how do you kill a democracy besides getting rid of faith and religion. The first thing he did was ban any kind of religious symbols in the schools and societies and replace them with his pictures and that other swastika. Next, he came in and knew that if he wanted to rule this country, he needed to convince the young people to follow him. He did that by developing what he called sports days, which, believe it or not, happened on Sunday. It was an all-day event, so people who were of religious belief could not go. The kids were required to go here. If you didn't go, your parents were thrown in jail, or worse. Okay? Now I'm going to back up a minute when I look at the ban to religion. We started that in this country in 1879. We really propelled that from 1947 to 1980, how piece by piece we took it out of society. We today, and I'm going to call it sports weekends. Sports is a wonderful thing. I played it. I think it's great for us in the concept that we do to relax and do things. But we may get a little bit overboard where it becomes our God. Next, he came back, and at that point in time, Vienna, Austria was a premier medical center of the world. He came back and introduced socialized medicine. Within a couple of years, it was totally destroyed. I'm not sure about you or what your feelings are. Do I believe we need to have some health care reform and do some things? I really do. But if the Affordable Health Care Act isn't the start of socialized medicine, I'm not sure what it is. Next, he came back in, and one of the key things he did was promote and establish what he called the Consumer Protection Agency, which was supposed to watch out for that consumer. You can think of the one story I read from an individual who had an uncle that ran a restaurant. They were forced to get rid of all the square tables and put in round tables because somebody may bump their leg on the edge and get hurt. Believe it, we're not far from that in this country. We established that Consumer Protection Agency in July of 2011. What was the last thing that killed this society because of the violence they wanted to control, Hitler and his regime were able to convince these people that if everybody registers their guns, we'll know who has it, we'll be able to control the violence. Keep in mind, these are people that are convinced that I need to do something, let's try it. They did. Violence didn't change. But now the government knows who has guns, where they're at, and they said, you know what, people? This violence is not going to stop until nobody has guns except the government and the police. They got it done. These people were dead. They sat there, and this took place over a period of approximately 3 to 5 years. After they saw what had happened, they stood back and made this statement, you know, if this would have happened very quickly, we would have seen this coming and we would have did something. Now, this is over a 3 to 5 year period. This is happening in our country since 1947. Oh, a little bit more gradual here than there, and maybe why we're not seeing this. But I think it's ultimately amazing. We're in the same order of doing things as Hitler did in Austria. Now, am I sitting here trying to paint a picture of gloom and doom and telling you that is going to happen here? It may or it may not. But I'm here to tell you, I don't think you want gun control. As I look back at this thing, I believe that we can look at all the things we want to cure this problem. But unless we bring back the moral values and the religion that it was based on, look at that democracy cycle, we can do anything we want to, and the violence will not go away. Mr. Washington, in his farewell speech, I've got about 3 excerpts in here of where he's at. And he says, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. And reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail to the exclusion of religious principle. My fellow Americans, this is what will fix your gun control and your violence problems, not legislation. I want you to think about consequences of legislation. You saw some of that in Germany. And I want you to look at, I'm guessing if I took most of the people in this country and said, how many of you have really looked at the Patriot Act? They'd say no. It'd scare you if you did. You should look at the Affordable Health Care Act. Whether it's right or wrong or indifferent or what your view is, somebody has to tell me what a million-man civil ready reserve corps has to do with medical. I believe that all the violence has happened in the shootings is deplorable and unacceptable. But I don't care what you do, you cannot legislate evil and immorality out of people. You must teach them what's right or wrong. You must start that in the family. You must nurture that in the school. You must promote it in society, and it must be exercised in the government if you were going to be successful and make it work. Now, as I conclude this video in here, one of the main points I wanted to make is that we must know the cause. And maybe my supposition is wrong, but I think it's a lack of morality and ethics and respect that did it. I want you to go back to that first bullet point I told you to remember in that first video. Do you want people's law or do you want ruler's law? And finally, there are 2 thoughts to leave you with. One is a statement for our forefathers is, with guns we are citizens, without guns we are subjects. And 2 comes from a piece of advice to a very wise Cherokee Indian chief to his grandson. So they were visiting one day. He said, grandson, each of us has 2 wolves in us. One is good and one is evil. And after a short pause, the grandson looks up at his grandfather and said, but grandfather, which one wins? He said, the one you feed. So his main point, and the point that I want to try to make, is what we're doing and the violence we have. It's a terrible thing. We need to change it, but we need to change it in the right way, for the right reasons. And I believe if we look at reestablishing that basis, that what we were built on in this country of religion and moral and ethics, we can take care of most of the problems we have. Thank you for joining us in this gun control. We'll look for that final one, I shouldn't say final, but the 8th one, which is in the descriptive series of this, called A Unified America in Education. Thank you.